Behind the carefully orchestrated public appearances and charming school photos lies a reality few will ever witness. While the world sees a young boy waving from palace balconies, Prince George is living a double life that would astonish even the most seasoned royal watchers. Away from cameras and crowds, he's being molded by an invisible army of protectors, teachers, and handlers who understand that the future of the British monarchy rests in their hands. Every morning when George wakes up, he doesn't just prepare for another day of childhood. He enters a world where every lesson has deeper meaning, every game teaches strategy, and every conversation is preparing him for a destiny that was decided before his first breath. This isn't just about learning to be royal. It's about learning to survive as one. What happens when the palace doors close? Who really shapes the mind of a future king? And how does a child navigate between being a normal boy and accepting the weight of a 1,000-year-old crown that will one day rest upon his head? The truth behind Prince George's secret royal training reveals a fascinating and complex world that operates in the shadows of public life, where ancient traditions meet modern realities, and where a young prince is being carefully crafted to rule a nation while trying to remain, somehow, just a boy. The alarm never sounds at 6 in the morning at Kensington Palace. Instead, Prince George awakens to the gentle stirring of his protection officer moving quietly through the corridors outside his bedroom. Even in sleep, the future king is never truly alone. The man responsible for his safety has been awake for hours, coordinating with a network of security personnel who operate like ghosts throughout the royal residence. George's morning routine might appear normal to any observer: brushing teeth, getting dressed, eating breakfast, but every element has been carefully planned by a team of advisors who think months ahead. His clothes are selected not just for comfort and style, but for their symbolic meaning and the message they send to the public when photographed. Even his breakfast choices are sometimes influenced by diplomatic considerations, as simple as avoiding certain foods before meeting with foreign dignitaries whose cultures might find them offensive. The young prince doesn't yet fully understand why his nanny, Maria Teresa Turian-Barallo, speaks to him in multiple languages throughout the day. What seems like casual conversation is actually intensive language training disguised as play. By the time George is 10 years old, he will be conversational in Spanish, French, and German, preparing him for a lifetime of international diplomacy. Maria doesn't just care for George. She's a graduate of the prestigious Norland College, trained in everything from defensive driving to martial arts, ready to protect the prince in any situation. During breakfast, while Prince William and Catherine discuss seemingly ordinary family matters, they're actually conducting George's first lessons in statecraft. They discuss current events in ways that help him understand different perspectives, teach him about the countries he'll one day help govern, and subtly introduce concepts of leadership and responsibility. These aren't formal lessons. They're carefully crafted conversations that shape his understanding of the world and his future role in it. The drive to school is never just a drive. George's protection officer, who doubles as his driver, takes different routes each day, constantly aware of potential security threats while making the journey seem routine to the young prince. The car itself is reinforced with bulletproof glass and contains communication equipment that keeps George connected to the palace's security center at all times. Yet to George, it simply feels like getting a ride to school with a friendly adult who knows interesting facts about London's history. At Thomas's Battersea, George experiences something unique among royal children, a relatively normal school environment. However, even here, his education is being supplemented in ways his classmates never notice. His teachers have been briefed on his future responsibilities, and while they treat him like any other student, they're also identifying his strengths and weaknesses to report back to the palace. This information helps shape his additional private education, ensuring that any gaps in his learning are addressed before they become problematic. During lunch breaks, while other children play freely, George is subtly monitored by school staff who've been trained to recognize potential security concerns. His friendships are naturally developing, but the palace keeps careful track of his social circle, not to control it, but to ensure his safety and understand the influences in his life. The children he befriends today may remain important figures throughout his life, potentially serving as lifelong confidants who remember him before he fully understood his destiny. After school, George's real royal education begins. While his younger siblings, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, might have more freedom to play, George returns to Kensington Palace for what the family calls afternoon lessons. Though these sessions are designed to feel more like interesting conversations with knowledgeable adults rather than formal classes. These afternoon sessions rotate between different experts. On Mondays, he might meet with a historian who tells him fascinating stories about his ancestors, helping him understand not just what previous kings and queens did, but why they made certain decisions and how those choices affected the nation. These aren't dry history lessons. They're engaging tales of adventure, intrigue, and leadership that help George understand his heritage while learning valuable lessons about decision-making and responsibility. Tuesdays might bring a geography expert who doesn't just teach George about different countries, but helps him understand the cultures, economies, and political situations of nations he'll one day interact with as king. They use games, maps, and virtual reality technology to make these lessons engaging, allowing George to visit places around the world and understand the diverse nature of the Commonwealth realms he'll eventually serve. Wednesday afternoons often feature etiquette training, though it's presented as learning about different customs and traditions rather than rigid rules. George learns proper greetings for various cultural contexts, understands the significance of different ceremonial procedures, and practices the kind of public speaking skills he'll need throughout his life. These sessions include fun activities like mock ceremonies where George gets to wear child-sized versions of royal regalia, making the learning process enjoyable while instilling important skills. Thursday might bring a science tutor who helps George understand environmental issues, technology, and other topics that will be crucial during his future reign. The palace is particularly focused on ensuring George understands climate change, renewable energy, and conservation, issues that will likely define much of his eventual kingship. These lessons often take place in the palace gardens, where George can see sustainable practices in action and understand his family's commitment to environmental responsibility. Friday afternoons are reserved for what the palace calls people skills, sessions with child psychologists and communication experts who help George understand how to connect with people from all walks of life. They use role-playing games and scenarios to teach him empathy, active listening, and the kind of emotional intelligence that will make him an effective leader. George practices conversations with imaginary farmers, factory workers, teachers, and doctors, learning to ask thoughtful questions and show genuine interest in people's experiences. Throughout all these lessons, George's instructors are carefully watching for signs of stress or overwhelm. Child development experts have advised the palace that too much pressure too early could be counterproductive. So they've designed a system that challenges George intellectually while preserving his childhood innocence and joy. The goal isn't to create a miniature adult, but to gradually build the foundation of knowledge and skills he'll need while allowing him to remain a curious, playful child. Evenings at Kensington Palace reveal another layer of George's unique upbringing. Dinner conversations with his parents aren't just family time. They're opportunities for William and Catherine to share age-appropriate insights about their royal duties and the reasoning behind their decisions. They discuss their charitable work, explain why certain public appearances are important, and help George understand how the royal family serves the nation and the Commonwealth. Bedtime stories take on special meaning in George's world. Rather than just entertainment, they often feature tales of historical figures, moral lessons, and stories that illustrate important values like service, courage, and compassion. Catherine has a collection of specially commissioned books that tell the stories of great leaders throughout history, both royal and otherwise, helping George understand that leadership comes in many forms and that being royal is ultimately about serving others. The palace staff who interact with George daily are more than employees. They're carefully chosen individuals who understand their role in shaping a future monarch. From the housekeepers who teach him respect for those who serve, to the gardeners who show him the value of hard work and patience, everyone around George is contributing to his education in subtle but important ways. Even George's playtime is thoughtfully structured. His toys include not just typical children's games, but also puzzles and building sets that develop strategic thinking, board games that teach negotiation and compromise, and outdoor activities that build physical confidence and teamwork skills. His riding lessons aren't just about learning an aristocratic skill. They're about developing courage, patience, and the ability to control powerful forces, metaphors for the leadership challenges he'll face as king. The palace maintains detailed records of George's development, tracking his interests, aptitudes, and personality traits. This information helps them tailor his education to his individual needs while ensuring he develops the broad range of skills necessary for his future role. They're particularly focused on fostering his natural curiosity and ensuring he develops strong analytical thinking skills that will serve him well in complex political and social situations. Security briefings happen around George without him realizing their significance. His protection team regularly updates their protocols based on changing global situations, but they do so in ways that don't alarm or restrict the young prince unnecessarily. The goal is to keep him safe while allowing him to develop normally, a delicate balance that requires constant adjustment as he grows older and becomes more aware of his unique position. The weekend brings different rhythms to George's life, but even his family time serves multiple purposes. Visits to the royal residences like Balmoral or Sandringham aren't just family getaways. They're opportunities for George to understand the scope of his inheritance and learn about land management, conservation, and the responsibilities that come with vast estates. He helps with simple tasks around these properties, learning the value of hands-on work and developing connections with the staff who maintain these historic places. As this first phase of George's secret royal training continues, the foundation is being carefully laid for the more intensive education that will come as he grows older. The palace knows that these early years are crucial for developing his character and worldview, so every experience is chosen with his future responsibilities in mind while still honoring his need to be a child. The invisible shield of protection and guidance around him operates seamlessly, preparing him for a destiny that grows more real with each passing day. As Prince George enters his middle childhood years, the subtle education of his early years transforms into something more substantial, though still carefully disguised as natural experiences. The palace education team, led by advisors who've spent decades preparing royal children for their destinies, understands that this phase is critical. George is now old enough to begin understanding his future role, while still young enough to absorb lessons naturally. The morning briefings that once happened around George now include him directly. His father, Prince William, has begun sharing simplified versions of his daily schedules, explaining why certain meetings matter and how royal decisions affect real people's lives. These aren't heavy political discussions, but rather stories about how the royal family's work connects to the citizens they serve. William might explain how a hospital visit he's planning will boost morale among healthcare workers, or how attending a charity event helps raise money for important causes. George's academic education at school continues normally, but his additional tutoring has become more sophisticated. The palace has quietly arranged for some of Britain's most distinguished educators to work with him during his private study time. These sessions now include mock scenarios where George must make decisions and explain his reasoning. He might be presented with a simplified version of a real challenge facing the government and asked how he would approach it, helping him develop critical thinking skills while learning about the complexities of leadership. The language lessons that began as playful conversations with his nanny have evolved into formal diplomatic training. George now participates in mock meetings with imaginary foreign dignitaries, learning not just to speak different languages, but to understand the cultural nuances that make international relations successful. He practices the art of saying meaningful things without making commitments, a crucial skill for constitutional monarchs who must remain politically neutral while still providing leadership. Physical training has become an essential part of George's routine, though it's presented as sports and recreation. His riding lessons now include elements of ceremonial horsemanship, preparing him for the state occasions where he'll need to appear confident and competent on horseback. Swimming lessons focus not just on fitness, but on water safety skills that could prove crucial given the royal family's extensive travels. Even his soccer playing is observed by sports psychologists who help him learn about teamwork, handling pressure, and gracious competition. The palace has begun exposing George to controlled versions of public attention. During family outings that appear spontaneous to the media, George is actually participating in carefully planned exercises designed to help him become comfortable with cameras and crowds. His parents coach him on natural behavior while being photographed, teaching him to remain authentic while understanding that his image carries meaning for millions of people who see him as a symbol of their nation's future. Weekends now include what the family calls heritage visits, trips to significant British locations where George learns about the nation he'll one day serve as head of state. These aren't typical tourist experiences, but rather in-depth educational journeys guided by historians and experts. At the Tower of London, George doesn't just learn about the crown jewels he'll eventually possess, but about the weight of history and the responsibilities they represent. He hears stories of previous monarchs who faced difficult decisions and learns about the consequences of their choices. During visits to Parliament, George receives private tours that help him understand how British democracy functions and where the monarchy fits within this system. He learns about the delicate balance between royal tradition and democratic governance, understanding that his future role will require him to support elected officials while remaining above party politics. These lessons help him appreciate that being king means serving the democratic will of the people rather than ruling over them. The charitable work that will define much of his adult life begins to take shape during these middle years. George accompanies his parents on carefully selected charity visits, where he can see firsthand how royal patronage makes a difference in people's lives. At children's hospitals, he learns that his presence can bring joy to young patients and support to their families. At environmental projects, he discovers how royal advocacy can help important causes gain public attention and funding. These charity visits serve multiple educational purposes. George learns empathy by meeting people facing challenges he's never experienced. He develops communication skills by talking with individuals from diverse backgrounds. Most importantly, he begins to understand that his privileged position comes with the responsibility to help others, a lesson that will shape his entire approach to kingship. The palace has established relationships with several practice families, carefully vetted households where George can experience different aspects of British life. During arranged playdates and visits, he spends time with families from various economic and cultural backgrounds, learning about different perspectives and challenges facing his future subjects. These experiences are designed to ensure that George's worldview isn't limited to the aristocratic circles he naturally inhabits. Financial education becomes increasingly important as George grows older. He learns about the cost of things, the value of money, and how economic decisions affect real families. The palace wants to ensure that George understands economic realities and can relate to the financial pressures facing ordinary citizens. He receives an allowance that he must budget, learning to make choices about spending and saving that mirror the decisions many families face. Technology training takes on new dimensions as George becomes more aware of the digital world that will dominate his reign. He learns about social media not just as a user, but as someone whose online presence will be scrutinized and interpreted. Cybersecurity experts teach him about digital privacy and the unique challenges facing public figures in the internet age. He practices using technology for positive purposes, understanding how digital platforms can be tools for royal communication and service. The mock ceremonies that were playful activities in his younger years now serve as serious preparation for real events. George practices elements of coronation procedures, state dinners, and other ceremonial occasions. These rehearsals help him understand the symbolic importance of royal rituals while building the confidence he'll need to perform these duties with dignity. He learns that every gesture, expression, and word during public ceremonies carries meaning for people watching around the world. Crisis management training begins in age-appropriate ways during this phase. George participates in scenarios where he must respond to imaginary emergencies or difficult situations. He learns about the royal family's role during national tragedies, natural disasters, and other challenging times. These exercises help him understand that being king isn't just about ceremonial duties, but about providing stability and reassurance during difficult periods. The psychological preparation for his unique life intensifies as George becomes more aware of his destiny. Child psychologists work with him to process the reality of his future responsibilities while maintaining his mental health and childhood happiness. They help him develop coping strategies for the pressures he'll face and ensure that he maintains a strong sense of personal identity separate from his royal role. Art and cultural education expand beyond basic appreciation to include understanding of cultural diplomacy. George learns how the arts can bring nations together and how royal patronage of cultural institutions serves important diplomatic and social purposes. He studies the history of royal collecting and patronage, understanding how his future support of artists and cultural institutions will influence British cultural life. Environmental education becomes increasingly sophisticated as George learns about the climate challenges that will define much of his reign. He studies renewable energy, conservation biology, and sustainable development not just as academic subjects, but as practical issues he'll need to address as king. The palace ensures he understands the global nature of environmental challenges and Britain's role in addressing them. Religious education takes on new complexity as George learns about his future role as head of the Church of England, while also understanding the multi-faith nature of modern Britain. He studies comparative religion and learns about the importance of religious tolerance and interfaith dialogue. These lessons prepare him to serve as a unifying figure for people of all faiths and backgrounds. The international perspective of George's education expands significantly during this phase. He learns detailed information about Commonwealth countries, understanding the unique relationships these nations have with the British Crown. He studies the history of the Commonwealth, learning about both its proud achievements and its complex colonial legacy. This knowledge prepares him to serve as head of the Commonwealth while being sensitive to the diverse perspectives of member nations. Military education begins in theoretical form as George learns about the armed forces he'll one day serve as commander-in-chief. He visits military bases and meets with service members, learning about their dedication and sacrifice. While still too young for formal military training, he begins to understand the weight of military command and the importance of supporting those who serve in uniform. The media training that began as learning to behave naturally while being photographed evolves into understanding the broader relationship between the monarchy and the press. George learns about the mutual dependence between the royal family and media outlets, understanding how to work with journalists while maintaining appropriate privacy and dignity. He practices giving brief statements and answering simple questions, building skills he'll use throughout his life. As this second phase of George's preparation continues, the balance between childhood normalcy and royal training becomes increasingly delicate. The palace team works constantly to ensure that George's development remains healthy and natural while providing him with the knowledge and skills he'll need as king. Every experience is carefully calibrated to challenge him appropriately without overwhelming him, building his capabilities while preserving the joy and curiosity that will make him an effective leader. The invisible network of advisors, teachers, and protectors around George continues to evolve as he grows, always adapting their methods to his changing needs while keeping their ultimate goal in sight, preparing a young boy to become a king who can serve his nation with wisdom, compassion, and effectiveness in a rapidly changing world. As Prince George transitions toward his teenage years, the carefully orchestrated preparation for his eventual role as king reaches its most intensive phase. The palace recognizes that these formative years will largely determine what kind of monarch he becomes, and every aspect of his education reflects this understanding. The playful lessons of childhood have evolved into serious preparation for one of the world's most demanding positions. These aren't traditional classes with desks and textbooks, but rather intensive seminars and practical exercises designed to develop real-world leadership skills. Constitutional law sessions have become particularly important as George nears the age where he'll begin to understand the legal and political frameworks within which he'll operate as king. Distinguished legal scholars walk him through landmark cases, constitutional crises, and the evolution of royal powers. He learns about the delicate balance between royal prerogative and parliamentary democracy, understanding how previous monarchs navigated political challenges while maintaining the crown's legitimacy. These constitutional lessons include detailed study of other constitutional monarchies around the world. George examines how the Swedish, Dutch, and Canadian systems compare to Britain's, learning from their successes and challenges. He studies constitutional crises from history, analyzing how different approaches affected the monarchy's relationship with the people and government. This comparative analysis helps him understand that there are many ways to be an effective constitutional monarch in the modern world. Economic education has become increasingly sophisticated as George prepares to inherit vast estates and financial responsibilities. He works with financial advisors to understand not just personal wealth management, but the broader economic impact of royal activities. George participates in mock summit meetings, practices state dinner protocols, and learns the intricate art of diplomatic communication. He studies the Commonwealth realms in detail, understanding the unique constitutional relationships between these nations and the British Crown. This knowledge prepares him for his eventual role as head of state for multiple countries with different political systems and cultural expectations. The palace arranges for George to meet privately with current and former world leaders during their visits to Britain. These conversations, carefully structured and supervised, give him insights into global leadership challenges while allowing experienced politicians to assess and advise the future king. These interactions help George understand that effective leadership requires building relationships with people who may hold very different views while finding common ground for cooperation. Language training has reached near fluency in several key languages, with George now capable of conducting basic diplomatic conversations in French, German, and Spanish. The palace has added Mandarin Chinese to his curriculum, recognizing China's growing importance in global affairs. These language skills aren't just practical tools, but symbols of respect for other cultures and evidence of George's commitment to international understanding. Military education begins to take concrete form as George approaches the age where he'll start considering his future military service. He spends time with different branches of the armed forces, learning about their roles, traditions, and challenges. Senior military officials brief him on current operations, helping him understand the complexities of modern warfare and peacekeeping. This education prepares him for his eventual role as commander-in-chief, while ensuring he understands the human cost of military decisions. The palace has established a program where George shadows different government ministers during their work, observing how policy decisions are made and implemented. He sits in on cabinet meetings as an observer, attends parliamentary sessions, and watches the daily operations of various government departments. This exposure helps him understand how the machinery of government operates and where the monarchy fits within this system. Charitable work transitions from occasional visits to serious engagement with causes that will likely define his future reign. George has developed particular interests in environmental conservation and youth development, areas where he's beginning to take on junior patronage roles. He doesn't just visit these organizations, but participates in strategic planning sessions and fundraising efforts, learning how royal involvement can make tangible differences in important causes. The environmental focus of George's education has intensified dramatically as climate change becomes an increasingly urgent global challenge. He works with leading climate scientists to understand the latest research, visits renewable energy projects to see sustainable technology in action, and participates in international youth climate summits. The palace recognizes that environmental leadership will likely be central to George's eventual reign, so they're ensuring he has both the knowledge and passion necessary to be an effective advocate for environmental action. Media relations training has evolved from learning to behave appropriately while being photographed to understanding the strategic use of media for royal communication. George practices giving interviews, learns to craft messages for different audiences, and studies how successful public figures use media to advance important causes. He also learns about the dangers of media attention, including how to protect his privacy while maintaining necessary public engagement. The palace has created a youth advisory council specifically to help George understand the perspectives and challenges facing his generation. This group of carefully selected young people from diverse backgrounds meets regularly with George to discuss issues like social media, career anxiety, environmental concerns, and social justice. These conversations ensure that George's worldview isn't limited to aristocratic perspectives and help him understand the concerns of the people he'll eventually serve. Crisis management training has become increasingly realistic as George demonstrates the maturity to handle complex scenarios. He participates in simulations of constitutional crises, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and other challenges that could test royal leadership. These exercises help him develop the calm decision-making skills and clear communication abilities that will be essential during difficult periods. The psychological support that has been constant throughout George's life intensifies during this phase as he fully grapples with his destiny. Professional counselors help him process the weight of his future responsibilities while maintaining his personal identity and mental health. They work with him to develop healthy coping mechanisms for stress and pressure while ensuring he maintains the empathy and emotional intelligence necessary for effective leadership. Technology education expands to include cybersecurity, digital diplomacy, and the use of technology for royal communication. George learns about the unique security challenges facing public figures in the digital age and how to use social media and other platforms effectively while maintaining appropriate dignity and privacy. He studies how other young royals around the world have navigated social media, learning from both their successes and mistakes. Cultural diplomacy becomes increasingly important as George learns how the monarchy can serve as a bridge between Britain and the world. He studies British cultural exports, learns about the global influence of British institutions, and understands how royal cultural patronage can strengthen international relationships. He practices using cultural events and celebrations as opportunities for diplomacy and relationship building. The palace begins exposing George to more challenging aspects of royal life, including the criticism and controversy that inevitably surround the monarchy. He learns how to respond to criticism constructively while maintaining confidence in his role and mission. These lessons help him understand that being an effective king requires resilience, humility, and the ability to learn from mistakes while continuing to serve effectively. As George approaches the end of this intensive preparation phase, the palace begins planning for his transition to young adulthood and eventual entry into full royal duties. They're designing a gap year program that will combine travel, service, and continued education, allowing George to gain international experience while continuing his preparation for kingship. The transformation from the child who once played in Kensington Palace Gardens to the young man being prepared for coronation represents one of the most comprehensive leadership development programs ever undertaken. Every lesson, every experience, and every relationship has been carefully chosen to prepare George for the unique challenges and opportunities he'll face as king. The invisible network of advisors, educators, and protectors who have surrounded George throughout his childhood now begin to step back slightly, allowing him more independence while ensuring he has the support and guidance necessary for success. They've built the foundation of knowledge, skills, and character that will serve him throughout his reign, understanding that the next phases of his development will require him to take increasing responsibility for his own growth and preparation. As this secret royal training reaches its culmination, the palace team reflects on their achievement. They've successfully prepared a young man to assume one of the world's most challenging roles while preserving his humanity, curiosity, and commitment to service. The crown awaits Prince George, and he's as ready as any human being can be for the extraordinary destiny that lies ahead. The boy who once needed protection from the weight of his future has grown into a young man capable of bearing that weight with dignity and purpose. The secret training that began in childhood has produced not just a future king, but a leader prepared to serve his nation and the world with wisdom, compassion, and effectiveness in whatever challenges the future may bring.